WHP.
All advice given is for general information purposes. All legal cases are different, and you should seek the advice of your own attorney before acting or making decisions. No attorney-client privilege applies to communications on this show, and no attorney-client relationship is created by calling or writing in. Attorney Rominger practices only in Pennsylvania and maintains his primary office in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
The only privilege you get on this show is the privilege of talking to me. There's no attorney-client privilege. Remember that. You're here right there in the scary warning. So, a week or two ago, we had some guy on here. Well, let me tell you what I did. After I strangled her, I buried... And I'm like, dude, you probably shouldn't confess to the crime on open radio because, we're probably about one subpoena away from a request to figure out who called into the show on the phone lines to figure out who's confessing to what crime. So keep that in mind, folks. That's why we like to keep it simple. Use first names. Don't identify major corporations unless you really feel like it, remembering that anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law someday, even in a custody case. So let's see, who's up next? I think, Fred, you've been holding most patiently. My talk line number is 540-0580. What's going on, Fred? Hey. Fred.
Hello.
Yeah.
Our grandson was killed in a car accident.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, it was hard. We raised him. It was in January 18th.
Okay.
And there was another car, maybe two cars involved, but the police did not pursue that. They said one of the cars stopped, but then it took off again.
Mm-hmm.
But the police wouldn't pursue it because they said it was probably somebody from out of the area. They'd never find him anyway, so they said they're not going to bother.
Right.
But it doesn't look like that was the case. It looks like it could have been somebody local here, and we did suggest that. It was somebody in Mannheim possibly, and they wouldn't pursue that either. So we're kind of at a loss here.
Now, is that what the police wouldn't pursue?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you have a civil attorney working on the case?
No.
Okay. That might be time to get someone like my firm or another firm that does this kind of work, auto accidents, and we may be able to look into, trying to civilly at least pursue some leads, and look into some things. There is investigation you can do, and there are ways of figuring out, for instance, if somebody had body damage to a car and had gotten repairs to it. So, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we did look at that. We looked at his car, and they claimed his car didn't hit anything else. But we, I guess, talked to one of the witnesses, and they weren't even sure if it made contact or not. They said it was so close that they thought maybe it did, but they weren't sure.
With the other car?
Yes.
So there may have been no contact. Was the car edged off the road, or what kind of accident are we talking about here?
That's what it sounds like. He was cut off the road there on 283 around the Reams E-Town exit, right before, maybe like 2 miles back from that.
And are the police agreeing that there was at least more than one other vehicle, or at least one other vehicle involved? Or
Yes, yeah, they did say that. They were saying that was possibly a Jetta, but the witness wasn't sure what kind of car. It was a light-colored car.
Okay. Well, something I'd be happy to talk to you about off the air. We can go into a few more details, and I'm not gonna ask you here on the air. I do have an office down in Lancaster too, so I can meet with you down there.
Okay.
If you call the office 241-607 now 717-241-607, and just let them know that you talked to me on the air, and then I want to meet with you in the Lancaster office, and they'll get us together.
241-6070. Yeah,
Yes,
she's
sir.
writing that down here.
Yeah, and then we'll talk off the air. And again, my condolences.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we raised him as son. Our son and him had lived with us, and then about a year and a half before that, they'd bought a house just 3 miles away from us. And yeah, he was still over at our house all the time. I just bought him the car the night before.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah. What kind of car was it?
Jetta.
Okay.
I think it was a 2001 or 2000. I'm not sure.
All right. Well, give me a call. We'll look into it off the air. And like I said, there may be some things we can do to help you reconstruct what happened. There may not be, but at least we'll give it a try.
Okay.
All right?
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for holding so long, Fred.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye. That's sad. 540-0580. Rob, you're on the air.
Hi, Carl. I enjoy your programs, just to mention that on the weekends. Very interesting to listen to.
Well, thank you.
It's all right. My wife, she has a timeshare. It used to be mine, but then she took it over under a new contract, and this went back to the year August of 2010. And we didn't use it that 1 year, although we paid in for the full maintenance fees and also the yearly assessment fee, and we also paid the monthly payments on it. Now, it's in her name. It's not in my name. But where I'm going with this is that we're trying to consider the weight of for her to get out of this contract, and it seems to be that the maintenance fees continually rise, and also when we went to book reservations about 3 months ago, nothing seemed to be available except for a few months out or a year out. And under the old plan, we would be able to go within a 45-day period and book a reservation. Now, under this new point plan, we can't do this, and this wasn't explained to us. So she does have the contract, and we're just looking for a way out of it. We're not looking for any money from it. We just want to get it out from underneath us.
And my experience with timeshares and timeshare contracts is they're boondoggles and quite often very difficult contracts to get out of. They always want you to sell it to somebody, right?
Yeah.
So there's an episode, and I just mentioned this as a funny aside, but there's an episode of South Park where they get a free timeshare seminar in Aspen, right? So they travel to Aspen, and you sit in the seminar, and then you get a free ski pass, to ski for the day. And when they get on the lift, it's the wrong color, and they send them over to this other lift that you have to have that color ticket, and it takes you right back up to the timeshare place. And the joke being is, once you've got one, you just can't get rid of them. And that has been a problem in my practice again and again in divorces is what do we do with the timeshare? Somebody seems to get stuck with it more than they get distributed it.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope people who are considering buying a timeshare out there are paying careful attention to this, right? So we'd be happy to read the contract and look for any ins or outs, but I would tell you just the first thing I would tell you if you were sitting in my office right now, I'd say, we'll look at it, but whether or not we have any great claim or way out, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a pretty fair analysis, but we need to actually see the contracts and look at what they proposed and how they did it. And
well, this was written in the state of South Carolina,
mm-hmm.
and at a popular resort down in Myrtle Beach. So we wanted, like I said, not to be redundant. We want to get out of it. Moreover, if we can't just by stop paying cold turkey, we don't know what legal ramifications would be involved, if there would be a civil judgment.
And the contract will have some provisions that talk about what happens if you don't pay, because we also want to watch out for acceleration clauses and damage clauses and things like that, which could result in a civil judgment larger than you'd be expecting.
Okay, and would they be able to, I guess, attach anything to her assets?
Potentially, if they get a judgment, yes.
Okay. Now, would that involve me as well, or just would that...
If your name's off the contract, then no, it's just going to be her problem.
Right. Well, we are living together. I just don't want them to come in and raid the house,
Yeah, well, if a sheriff comes into a house to levy on it, stuff that belongs to you, they can't levy on, and you'd have to be able to take an exception to that.
Okay. But they can't. It's very hard, I understand, but it isn't impossible to get out of them. I mean, am I wrong in that, or is it pretty much 100% ironclad you can't get out of them?
Well, I'm saying it leans in that direction.
Okay.
There certainly have been some clever lawyers who've found holes, and every contract has vulnerabilities. The real question is, whether or not it's obvious and whether or not it's a strong one. And also, because you say there was some renegotiation or the new contract kind of took the place of the old one?
Yeah, my name was on the original one. It was a lot lower, and the maintenance fees were almost in half. And then they said this was a better plan. It was based on a point system, 10,000 points for every 2 years, and that leaves us 5,000 points a year to use. So if you pick a 2-bedroom unit and it uses 3,400 points, you really can't go away twice unless you want to cram a family into one room.
Right.
So it's very deceptive. They made it sound as though, well, you could possibly go 2 or 3 times a year if you wanted to.
And you can always buy extra points too, right?
Right. Exactly.
Imagine that. I got to go to break. They're giving me the signal, brother.
Okay.
All right. Let me know.
All right. What's your Lancaster office?
The main number is 717-241-6070. The Lancaster office is at 1000 North Prince, so just call, make an appointment.
Thank you very much, Carl.
All right, man. Good luck.
Bye-bye.
540-0580. See you guys after the break. Oh, welcome back. 540-0580. Let's see here. Now I got to try to figure out the order of the business here. I think Mike is up next. Mike, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hey, what's going on?
Yeah, my issue is very minor in relation to a lot of the other callers. But
No. Nobody's issues are more important than other people's.
It just irritates me to know that to know mine. I work for a hospital in non-patient care. I'm in front of a computer all day long. They're instituting mandatory flu shots. They're offering medical/religious exemptions. I fill out a religious exemption form. Listing 2 scriptural verses regarding foreign proteins in the body and so forth. It was denied. What they want to see is an actual mention in the church doctrine manual, so to speak, thou shalt have no vaccines. Okay, well, obviously that doesn't exist. But as I replied to the representative, if I were to pull my kids out of school because they're passing out contraceptives for my 12-year-old, or they're showing pornographic films in health class, loosely labeled as sex ed, and I pull them out and I claim a religious exemption, I'm not going to find that in my church doctrine either. But it's a matter of conviction.
Right.
So in other words, what does religious exemption mean? It's a matter of conviction. No, I'm not going to find anything in the church dogma regarding no vaccines. But I have a very strong argument, or I don't want flu shots. I don't want something ingested in my body that could have ramifications, dubious benefits, and who knows, as you get older, all this stuff that you put in your muscle tissue, which is where it's stored, the ramifications down life, Alzheimer's and the Parkinson's and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a money-making thing for the hospital/vaccine people, but it's mandatory or you lose your job. Now I can't. So I went to the church and I composed a letter, had him look it over. But in the meantime, I cannot produce anything in the written doctrine of the church regarding vaccines. So where's my recourse? In other words, it's either vaccine or you lose your job.
Right. And
which is fantastic.
Which you could probably maybe get unemployment if they can't accommodate your religious beliefs.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
And that's it then. Okay. So in other words, the employer he can say they can stipulate any sort of dogma, and then if I don't follow it, and they cut me out. That's basically where it stands, right?
It's interesting, right? It is interesting because, of course, you're going to have to figure out where can employers draw the line. So you can't smoke on the premise, let's say.
Well, that's the next thing. I'm not a smoker. Right. Never was, never will be. But the next thing is now they will not hire smokers,
right?
Which is okay. But in the meantime, they're forcing me to inject something in my body that I don't want, and I'm not the only one. There are many people. But when it comes down to your job, and a flu shot. I mean, think of weigh it out. There's no. It's a dumb question, but
no, I understand, and I understand your position, and it's no. Let me play devil's advocate for 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, I believe in getting flu shots and other shots like that, and vaccinations.
Okay.
I think they've been very positive for public health overall. But I'll agree with you that we've only been experimenting with this stuff for 50, 70, 100 years max, if you want to think about it. You go all the way back to Pasteur with the smallpox, right, exposing the milkmaids.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, we haven't been doing it for 500 years or something like this. We don't have a lot of long-term studies, and a lot of what we're doing now is pretty recent. We may wake up one day and discover that cell phones are frying everybody's brains, right?
When I do research on flu shots, I can find as many contra as pro studies on the shots. The benefits are dubious. There are side effects. I've had flu shots in the past before I felt this strongly convicted. But it's the matter. It's how dare a government or civic or social group question my conviction about something.
And this is where I was going to come back to you on something, which is let's assume for a minute that I just go ahead and say, well, you're an idiot. Go ahead and get the flu shot. Who cares, right?
Yeah.
But then the next question is, now they want to inject you with fill in the blank.
Correct.
And who gets to pick?
Right.
This is always a problem, because this goes all the way back to fluoridation, okay? Who gets to pick when it's safe enough, or the studies have confirmed it well enough, or this is the way we should do it? And so, years ago they had the eugenics, right? And they were running around sterilizing people.
Right. And
the Supreme Court wrote, 3 generations of idiots is enough?
Yeah.
And everybody thought eugenics was great. And then that led to... things like the Nazis, who practiced eugenics with extreme ruthlessness, but it was done here in America as well. It was all over the world, every popular scientist.
Yeah.
And then my other favorite pet project, global warming, which used to be global cooling, which is now called climate change.
Yeah.
Who gets to decide which scientific studies mandate which social and public policies apply?
Well, in my case, the employer.
Right, and that's so. At least in your case. It's not, take the injection or we're going to make Soylent Green out of you.
Yeah.
You still have some options, although realistically in this job market, thanks to the State of the Union, I'm not certain that it's a great choice, right? Mm-hmm. But anyhow, you are highlighting a very interesting policy point, which is when and where do we draw those lines? Because and the reason I brought up eugenics is what's all the rage in science, and why I brought up global warming. What's all the rage in science isn't always true in the long run.
Exactly.
And we do legitimately believe, for instance, in the mainstream scientific community for certain things to be true that are later proven false.
But don't you think to yourself, let's say your brother, your aunt, your sister gets cancer of the pancreas. Where did this come from? My father's only 55 and he has Alzheimer's, or my mother's only 60 and she has. Where does this stuff come from?
And it could come
from. And I learned in graduate school that all this battery of vaccinations that they impart on young kids is stored in muscle tissue. It's not degraded. It's not excreted. It's stored in muscle tissue. So who's to say as we get older, this stuff doesn't manifest itself?
Well, I'm not gonna stamp off on that because I'm not certain that that's the case. But the flip side is, I will say, long-term effects of things, and more importantly, I'll give you an example. They just thought, we'll turn it to genetics for a second, right?
Okay.
They decode the genome and they go, okay, well we should be able to figure some stuff out, and then they start going, wait, all this junk DNA, as people used to call it, which seemingly had no purpose, now turns out to be really the control board of all the other DNA, which is why simply inserting a gene doesn't always have the straight line effects that they expected it to, and which is why the origins of genetic disease are so complex, because so many things are recycled and interplay. So my point is, just as they're rethinking the entire way of how the human genome works, it's quite possible that fragments of foreign DNA from vaccines or other things are going to be understood to act differently. And maybe they do insert themselves. And we do know that viruses, for instance, can cause cancer. I mean, that we know. Now, whether or not a dead flu virus is going to be likely to cause cancer, or will it save more lives over time, we don't know. I mean, and I'll grant you that. And so I guess what I wanted to make sure I say is, it's very important that people like you push back on the medical establishment, if for no other reason than to keep testing and proving. So maybe if you're proven wrong someday, right? Someday some really good studies are done and it's just it's black and white. The flu vaccine saves more lives than it takes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at my age, 61, and I'm not marching in the streets,
right.
in jeopardy of a job. But this is not something where they're mandating a certain license or a class that I have to. This is something they're mandating I inject into my body. I'm going to do it because I have no recourse really.
Right, and you need to keep your job.
Yeah,
and so no, but I'm glad that you're at least testing it. And so I just want to make sure you understand. I disagree with your conclusion because I think based on what I've seen that the flu shots work.
Well, before I wrote this letter, I'm telling you, I did research on flu vaccines and religious exemptions and medical exemptions, and I can find you as many contra studies as pro. And every year the flu the flu strain changes. Mm-hmm. They're always struggling to come up with something new. I think it's a money thing for the hospital. I don't know how to tie it in, but it's especially if you don't even work with patients.
Well, remember, it's always a money thing. Everything everybody does is a money thing.
Yeah, but it's always it's. I don't work with patients,
right?
And as long as I figure, I haven't had the flu for years. And I wash my hands all the time. I'm training all the time. I get sinus things, but in the meantime, how dare somebody say that I have to have something injected? And
so
the bottom line.
Here's the next question. What if it? Remember when we had the swine flu running around?
Yes.
And then we were getting into, okay, we're going to be a little more experimental about this. We got to rush this forward. So you can imagine a scenario where there's a new, quote, public health crisis, and they want you to, particularly because you work in a medical establishment, they want you to be the first guy to ingest, this new substance to see what happens.
Right.
So you can get to a point where, where does your individual freedom get eroded? Now, here you have a private employer, and you guys got to work that dance out, and there's no right to work, was what the average listener here would tell you, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The flip side is, if it's a government mandate, then that's a slightly different scenario. And that's why I come back to fluoridation and mentioned it only because that's been an area where these policy concerns have been pushed back and forth many times over the years, which is the right not to be mass medicated. Now, we do know, and I'll give you an example of one that we do know, is adding folate to the wheat supply has basically, knocked back birth defects levels greatly.
Okay.
So there are some public health things that we know we've done that have had really good or positive results, but I don't know that there's that many of them.
Yeah, and I can determine whether I want to go organic or inorganic.
That's right,
I can determine what I ingest in my body on my plate. But this mandated thing where...
No, you're right.
Especially since the results are dubious, to say the least, and there are side effects. I've had flu shots in the past. I do not have I don't remember side effects. It's just, when does this stop?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought it up, and I think it was interesting to talk about. I got to go to break.
I'm sorry, yes.
Right.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye.
540-0580. Hey, welcome back. Carl Rominger here, 540-0580. Why would anybody think Mardi Gras is in April? Anyhow, go figure. All right. Jan, you're on the air.
Carl, I have a question about easement. When I bought my property about 10 years ago, I was told that there's a utility easement at the back end of my yard, and I couldn't build anything or put anything on that property. It runs between two telephone poles.
Yeah.
And in late June, I would say, a sinkhole opened up in the back of that property, right in front of the one telephone pole. And I had called my township to question, what is my responsibility for that property, that area there. And police came out, and the yellow tape, it's still up. I took one of my little garden fences and put it around it so neighborhood kids wouldn't run into it.
Right.
It's a good size. I mean, I think I could probably stand up in it, and I'm 5'8". So, and I don't know where it runs or where it goes in different directions. But anyway, the tape is still there, and I haven't heard from them, even though I tried to contact my township to see if they were going to do anything about it. I don't know if I should contact the telephone company or if it's my problem, and I'm getting concerned about this kind of thing for liability and all that kind of stuff. Precedent is that several years ago there had been one between my property at the side and another person's property, and the township had come out and filled it in.
Right.
And so anyway, as I look at it, I see the tape still down there. It's coming off the telephone pole to this little garden fence that's around the top perimeter of the hole. And I'm getting nervous about it going on and on and on. And what if somebody does fall in there? Kids are, playing hide and go seek and all that kind of stuff in the neighborhood, and it makes me very nervous. So I guess I need to wonder do I have responsibility for easement?
Well, that's interesting. It's a utility easement, which means that they have the right to put the utilities across it, right?
Right, and bring their trucks back. I'm not allowed to plant any trees.
Right.
Everything I planted in my yard is 5 foot back, at least from there. And it's my property adjoins a property directly behind mine. I would assume they have the same responsibilities.
But here's the dilemma. An easement's just that. It's a right to come across the land, and it requires them to if they come on and do any damage, they've got to fix it, okay?
Yeah.
You can't block them. You've got to maintain the easement pursuant to whatever the agreement says, if there is one. And the agreement may have some maintenance proportions in it as to how maintenance should be fixed or split. If not, then basically it's still your land, because an easement means it's still your land, therefore it's still your responsibility.
So I probably should go ahead and just do something about it.
Yeah.
Every time I'd call the township, they kept saying, "Well, we're taking care of it. We're going to get into it." Because I know they came back and they trimmed the neighbor behind me has a huge tree, and they took out all the branches and all that because they were interfering with the wires and stuff like that. So that's what I didn't know.
But we may want to just look at the easement, get a copy of it, and look at it to say, "Hey, you go ahead and do it," or give them a deadline to do it and say, "If you don't fix it by this time, then I'm going to do it." And then I'm going to bill you for it.
Oh, that's a good idea, yeah. Well, that's what I didn't know, and there's nothing really in my, I looked at my, what do you call it, when you buy the house, whatever, deed, and it just said that I was responsible to maintain that, and I couldn't put anything on that property because of the utility easement running through there. And that's all it says. It's not really defined much more than that, so... That's what I wasn't sure of, and I am concerned about liability for somebody falling in that hole.
Right.
Especially a child.
No, I understand. I would I would tell you, let's find out what we need to do.
Yeah, and that's what I don't know what my next step should be, to how to find that out. Right. Would that be at the courthouse?
Yeah, there should be a recording of the easement at the courthouse. We'd probably look in your deed and see if it references it.
Okay.
And it may specifically reference it. If you're part of a subdivision, there may be a bigger plan.
I see. Mm-hmm. Okay, because it runs, I know that part of the problem when the original hole opened up years ago between the other neighbor, there's a sewer drain, from the street. There's a pipe that runs right under there. And and then it splits and goes off to two other streets at the back of my yard. And they told us they put a light down there to see if there was any leak, because we always thought it was in conjunction with the sewer drain, that maybe the water was following the pipe, or the pipe had a hole in it, or something like that.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything from them, and that's what I wasn't sure, if I should go ahead and do anything. So
I would try to push on them first.
Mm-hmm.
You have homeowners insurance?
I do, and I actually do have sinkhole insurance, but it's only on the house. Right.
But at least they will cover you if there's any problems in the meantime, with somebody falling in or anything along those lines.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know.
So I want to make sure. So you got some coverage. So I would recommend pushing on the township, and in the meantime taking a look to see if there's any way to push responsibility back on them.
Okay, or even I didn't know if the utility had any responsibility.
Well, utility may too. That maybe we have to see this agreement.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Good luck.
Bye.
Those are the fun things in life. Little sinkhole. Let's see here. Eric, you're on the line.
Yeah, good afternoon, Carl.
Hey, what's going on?
Hey, 3 weeks ago I got a certified letter from the Borough of Mechanicsburg because I had one of my vehicles out front that I didn't have registered or inspected for about 11 months. And they gave me 10 days to get it registered and inspected to get it off the little street I live on.
Right.
Or they were going to tow it within 10 days. So about 9 days later, I went over to PennDOT and I got it registered. And I know in Pennsylvania, after you buy a vehicle, you have 10 days after you register it to get it inspected.
Right.
And so another 7 days went by and I got it inspected. Well, last week I got a citation in the mail from the borough for not having it inspected within the 10 days.
Okay.
And So I pled not guilty, and I got a hearing next month.
And you'll be able to show that you did it within the 10 days?
Well, you see, I got it registered within 10 days.
Gotcha.
And it's insured, and it's always been insured. And when I got it registered, I know the law is when you buy a vehicle or you newly register a vehicle, you got 10 days from that date that it's registered with the state to get it inspected.
Right.
And I did that. But it wasn't within the whole 10 days, the initial 10 days, that I first got my certified letter.
Right. This sounds like a one for the discretion of the judge, which is either, hey, judge, I guess you could hold me to the technical, I didn't get it done within 10 days of the warning. Or, judge, I did get things started. Let me show you how I did get things moving right away, but we just weren't able to complete it in that 10 days. But I was so close to complying with that my crime is de minimis. I mean, very small or trifle.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, there's an old Latin saying about the law doesn't bother itself with small things. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, it's really is silly of them at this point to cite you, but they're going to say, maybe they're going to say we weren't aware that he had taken these steps at the time. See, the gracious way for everybody to get out of this, if I was your lawyer, right, and I'm there at the hearing, I'd say to them, listen, I guess you guys weren't aware. He should have communicated with you what he was doing, so you were aware. You guys are saying you weren't aware, so really you can, withdraw the charge, and everybody can live happily ever after because you accomplished what you wanted. And he's aware of his obligations, and he was working on it. The only mistake was you guys weren't communicating well.
Well, you see, the ironic thing is the day that I got it registered, I walked into the Mechanicsburg Police Department, and I gave it to the secretary because the officer wasn't in.
Right.
And I said, here's I'm getting this done. Here's the registration form, copy from PennDOT.
That's even better. That's even better. I mean, I really think this is a good one to basically plead your case to the judge.
Yeah, I plan on it. And just one more thing, sir. It says if this judge, for some reason, district justice, decides to find me guilty, on the bottom of the letter it says you can appeal it. Can you appeal a summary offense?
You can. You have 30 days to appeal it to the Court of Common Pleas downtown.
Does that cost any money?
They'll charge you about $60, I think, for the appellate fee at the clerk of courts.
Yeah, because the fine's $125. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, you're running into the part where you might be easier just to pay the fine at that point.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
That's the best answer I got. But hey, you have good. Make sure you point all that out. Like, I did drop this off. The officer wasn't there. Maybe things crossed in the communications, so to speak. But I was trying to comply. Yeah.
Well, I'll do that. But I was just wondering if he says, well, technically, it wasn't a new vehicle you bought because,
Right. Well, I understand. But you can say, hey, I was just working things along, taking them in order, trying to keep the police officer updated.
Right.
Technically, you probably violated the law. But is it a violation that we can overlook? And the answer might be yes, because it's either such a trifle or, more importantly, because you were taking affirmative steps to remedy the situation at the time you were charged.
Okay, affirmative steps. I'm going to have to remember
like that.
Yeah, I do.
I got to go to break, brother.
All right, thank you.
All right. That's right. We got big words in the law. 540-0580. Let's take some affirmative steps to go to break. Oh, Mr. Squirrel had a question. All right, I got to remind you guys, November 3rd, Mark Virginis will be here answering our financial questions. So if you're planning your retirement, think about planning your retirement and want to know whether to sink all your money into the Greek economy, come on November 3rd at 2 p.m. and we'll talk to Mark about that. On November 11th, Bob Carey is going to have me on his show Garden Talk. Go to romingerlaw.com to look up the schedule on that. It's from 11:30 to 12:30 on a Sunday morning. We're going to answer all legal questions involving plants and not hemp or ganja for you tokers out there, but things like trees and bushes and shrubs and property lines. And November 17th, Keystone Elder Law is going to be here. I may be attending from a remote. I'm planning to be hunting in New York, maybe. And if I am, we'll let them fill in the studio for the whole. Maybe we'll bump them up to the whole 2 hours, Shane. They're scheduled for 2 to 3 on November 17th, but trust me, they can talk. And December 11th, I'm going to be at the Northern York County Fish and Game Club discussing gun rights, gun laws with a question and answer session. Now, let's take a few more calls here. You guys have been keeping me busy today. Dwayne, you're on the air.
What's going on?
Not too much.
I talked to you about this a little bit before.
Yeah.
But these Newberry Police Department, I think they need to be put in their place, along with the township.
Maybe you should move to Newport. They just got rid of their police department.
Well, that's probably a good thing, because you know what? These local cops...
I know you don't like them.
Not all of them, but most of them, especially these younger punks that's coming on.
So if you want to, what's your question? Let's get this down to, if you want to sue a police department, a private citizen can sue a police department for a violation of your civil rights.
Well, I don't know if you remember or not, but I talked about it before. Yeah. I was like, a group of people approached me, and I was like attacked on my own property. I was the only one arrested, because I supposedly endangered them. How did I endanger them when they left their own safety of their porch and approached me?
I understand. How long ago did this happen?
This was last November, and in July, in court, I was found not guilty on everything. But still, these guys didn't do any investigation.
No, I know. Listen. You got a 2-year statute of limitations. I would encourage you to maybe sit down with a civil rights attorney and see, keeping in mind that police are not liable for mere mistakes. You've got to get around their qualified immunity, okay? Yeah. But remember, you got a 2-year statute of limitations. I got 2 more callers I want to jump on before we run out of time here. But
is that something you guys handle at all?
Vinny in my office does those. So if you call in and talk with Vinny Manfredo, he can give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down on it, keeping in mind that most lawsuits that people would propose against a police officer don't go anywhere, okay?
Well, I even have another police officer that works there even says it's a bunch of crap the way they dealt with it in his opinion.
No, I understand that, but just because something's a bunch of crap doesn't mean you have a legal right. So talk to Vinny about that. All right, who else we got here? It's George, you got an out-of-state speeding ticket?
Yeah, Carl. I had called your office actually a couple of weeks ago. It was up in the Warsaw area. And I sent the letter back, pleading not guilty. Yeah. That's kind of what the general, consensus was. And now I just got a letter where I'm supposed to, appear for a pretrial conference in December. And of course, it seems like all these things are always like 6 o'clock in the evening.
They're town courts up there in New York.
Yeah, this happens to be in a small town of Perry, which is just outside of Warsaw, and I know you used to work, I think, or live up in that area, so I knew.
Chautauqua County.
Yeah, I knew you were more familiar with this. And here's where I'm going with this. I have secured, went over to PennDOT and secured, my record. Actually, I went back 10 years, just like, like if you're going for a job, sometimes they request your driving record, and I have nothing on that. It's completely, clean. Now, what I'm wondering is, this thing here, of course, they didn't give an exact, amount, but in other words, the fine itself can run anywhere from $90 to, $300, and that does include the extra costs, I guess, for the handling or whatever, which I understand can probably be another $85. So, at least up there, as compared to around here, it seems somewhat more expensive. And then I understand I was doing basically 70 in a 55 zone out in a rural area. Yeah. Because you're probably familiar with that area. And here's the crazy thing, and I just wanted to ask you about this. What it was a trooper, a state trooper, as opposed to a local cop, had a radar gun. She was coming the opposite direction of me. We were at least, I'd say, a quarter mile apart. In other words, far enough apart that I didn't realize, because it was an unmarked car, that was a trooper. And I guess I really wasn't paying attention. I didn't have my, what do you call it, thing where you set your speed out or whatever?
Cruise control.
Yeah, cruise control one, because I usually use that on expressways. By the time we got to one another, and as I say, there wasn't anybody in front of her, in front of me, behind me, or anything else. Again, each of us probably for, I'd say an eighth to a quarter of a mile. So it wasn't like there was endangerment to anybody. It's basically just didn't pay attention to the speed at the time. And I was even going down a hill. Now, when we were right beside each other. Of course, I saw that it was an officer. I checked my, speedometer and saw that I, was going near that speed. I can't tell you exactly what it was, but, I started to slow down. We, again, because going opposite directions and each of us going at least 55 or better, not sure what she was doing. I could see her, again, about a quarter mile behind me now, doing a U-turn at an intersection, which was, she was approaching and putting the lights on. So sure enough, I knew, she must be coming after me because there wasn't anybody else around. So I, of course, slowed down, came to a complete stop. She pulled up behind, and she asked a question, said, do you know why I, stopped you? And I said, no, I'm not sure. And she said, well, you were doing 70 in a 55 zone.
Right.
She said, do you have any, tickets or anything outstanding or so? I said, no to that, which was true because I've never had a ticket or anything up in New York. She went back to her car. And I thought maybe she was just going to check that out and then possibly, give me a warning. And of course, pulling behind me, she saw I was from Pennsylvania.
You better get the question out, brother.
So she printed this thing out, gave me this. I sent it back, plead not guilty and stuff. Now I got this.
I got 10 seconds.
Okay. What can I avoid the hearing and just ask for a trial because I don't want to go up twice? Or can you not do that?
You want
In other words, I want to get off with a minimum.
Ask for the prosecutor, get hold of the prosecutor, and negotiate it with them. That's the best answer I can give you in New York. Get hold of the prosecutor and negotiate it with them. Guys, I'll see you next week.